I never believed in family curses, but I'll confess that after everything, I started to question. At 53 years old, I thought I had seen it all in life. Disappointments, betrayals, lies that echo through generations. But the way my brother and my brother-in-law robbed me, that was beyond anything I could have imagined. My name is Roberto, and this is the story of how I lost everything and paradoxically got my life back. I grew up in a family of small business owners. My father had a hardware store, nothing luxurious, nothing fortunate, but it had honor, it had respect for the word given. He always said, "Roberto, a man is only as good as his word." I believed that with all the strength of my heart. I carry that lesson to this day, even though it cost me dearly. My brother Marcelo was 4 years older than me. He was always different from me. While I built slowly, carefully, he was impatient, always looking for shortcuts. My father saw this and sometimes talked to me on weekends. "Roberto, watch your brother carefully. Intelligence without character is a time bomb." I was too young to fully understand what he meant. When my father died at 72 years old, he left the store to both Marcelo and me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was legitimate. A business running for over 40 years with loyal customers, credibility in the region. My father also left an apartment, a modest property in the neighborhood where we lived, and he left a letter that Marcelo saw before I did. By this time, Marcelo had already married Fernanda, a beautiful woman, intelligent, but with that gleam in her eyes that you learn to recognize as greed. She came from a well-connected family, executives, bank managers. She saw the hardware store as a starting point, not as a legacy. I saw that clearly from the beginning, but I didn't say anything. I was trying to be the good brother, the understanding one. The first sign of trouble came 6 months after the funeral. Marcelo called me to the store one afternoon. He had that expression on his face, the one that usually meant he wanted something. We sat in our father's old office, surrounded by filing cabinets and the smell of dust and old wood that still lingered from when Dad was alive. "Roberto," he began, his voice carefully measured, "we need to talk about the business. About the future." I listened. I always listened to my brother, even when my instincts screamed otherwise. "The store is outdated," he continued. "The neighborhood is changing. We need capital to modernize, to expand. I've been thinking, maybe we should take out a loan against the property, the apartment. We could use that as collateral and really take this business to the next level." I felt something cold in my chest. My father's apartment wasn't just property, it was security. It was a backup plan. It was the only thing that would have been truly mine if something went wrong. "Let me think about it," I said carefully. But Marcelo didn't give me much time to think. Within a week, he had papers drawn up. Within 2 weeks, he had already met with a banker friend of Fernanda's family. Within a month, the loan was approved. And I signed because I didn't want to be the obstacle. I didn't want to be the brother who held everyone back. I didn't want to fail at being a good family man. That's when my brother-in-law, Carlos, entered the picture more prominently. Carlos was Fernanda's older brother. He was a lawyer, a successful one, working with real estate and business law. He had that confident, polished demeanor that comes from money and education. He also had something else, an appetite for other people's assets that was barely concealed beneath his tailored suits and expensive cologne. The first time I remember feeling genuinely uncomfortable around him was at a family dinner. It was maybe 2 months after the loan was approved. We were at a restaurant, the 4 of us, me, Marcelo, Fernanda, and Carlos. They were discussing something about restructuring the business, about bringing in new partners, about expanding. "Roberto," Carlos said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "your brother has such vision. We're lucky to have him. With the right guidance, the right structure, this little hardware store could become something really impressive." Little hardware store. Those words stung more than he probably realized. That store had fed my father, his family, and had been feeding me and Marcelo since we were young, but I said nothing. I smiled politely and listened as they talked about the future like I wasn't even part of it. That night, driving home alone, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about control, and I was losing it fast. Over the next year, everything moved quickly, too quickly. The loan money came in, and suddenly there were consultants, friends of Carlos, helping to restructure the business. There were new partners brought in, people I didn't know, people Marcelo seemed to trust implicitly. Documents were prepared, contracts were signed, and each time I asked questions, I was assured everything was fine. "Roberto, you worry too much," Marcelo would say, patting me on the shoulder like I was a nervous child. "This is the future. This is how business works now." But it wasn't business. It was a systematic dismantling of everything my father had built, and I was signing the papers that made it legal. By the time I realized what was really happening, it was almost too late. I had lost operational control of the store. My name was still on the deed, but I had no authority. My salary had been reduced because, according to the restructuring plan, the business needed to invest in growth. Marcelo's salary, however, had tripled. Fernanda had somehow been added to the payroll as a consultant, even though she had never stepped foot in the store. And Carlos had become a partner officially, with a stake in the business and decision-making power. I felt like I was drowning in slow motion, and no one seemed to notice or care. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I'd gone to the store early, like I did every morning, to check inventory and prepare the daily reports. My hands were still calloused from years of work, from lifting boxes and organizing stock. These hands had earned this business as much as Marcelo's had. I was in the back office when I heard Marcelo and Carlos talking. They weren't trying to be quiet. Maybe they didn't think I was there. Maybe they didn't care if I heard. The door was slightly ajar, and their voices carried. "The numbers are good," Carlos was saying. "By next year we can completely buy out his share. He's losing money, he's losing influence. He's practically irrelevant already." My hands froze. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. "He's such an idiot," Marcelo said, and I could hear the contempt in his voice. The contempt of a brother who had decided I was worth nothing. He actually believed we were building something together. He signed every paper I put in front of him without even reading them. They laughed. They actually laughed. I stood there in that back office, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's legacy, and I felt something break inside me. Not in a violent way, not in a dramatic way. It was quiet. It was the sound of my trust dying. It was the sound of my naivety finally collapsing under the weight of reality. I had one choice to make. I could walk away, accept my fate as the fool who had been played by his own family, or I could fight back. And for the first time in a very long time, I decided to fight. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed time. I needed to think. More importantly, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The full extent of what Marcelo and Carlos had done, not just the suspicions that had been growing in my mind for months. I spent that entire day going through every document I could find. I had copies of most contracts at home, the ones I had received anyway. Some made sense. Others were deliberately confusing, filled with legal jargon that was meant to obscure rather than clarify. I started making lists, dates, amounts. The picture that emerged was devastating. The loan we had taken out against the apartment, it was significantly higher than what was actually needed for any reasonable business expansion. Where had that excess money gone? I started tracing it, following the paper trail through various accounts. Some of it had gone to consulting firms that were actually shell companies. Some of it had been transferred to accounts in names I didn't recognize. And some of it, a substantial amount, had simply been paid out as management fees to Carlos's law firm. The partnerships Marcelo had brought in, they didn't exist. at least not as real business partners. They were more like fronts. The money was moving in circles, being siphoned away from the business and into private accounts. And the whole structure was designed so that by the time the loan came due, the business would be technically insolvent. The apartment, my father's apartment, the one thing that was supposed to be safe, would be seized. And then what? Then Marcelo and Carlos would swoop in, buy the struggling business at a fraction of its real value from the bank, or whoever ended up holding the deed, and they would have consolidated everything. I would have nothing, less than nothing. I would have debt and shame and the knowledge that I had handed them everything on a silver platter. It was diabolical in its simplicity. It was the kind of scheme that only worked because it relied on trust, on family bonds, on the assumption that people wouldn't do this to each other. My father had always told me that the world wasn't kind to naive people. I just never thought my own brother would be the one to teach me that lesson so harshly. I sat at my kitchen table that night, papers spread out in front of me, and I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called someone I had known since college, someone I trusted, someone who had no connection to Fernando's family or their circles of influence. His name was Fernando, and when I explained the situation to him, he was silent for a long time. "Roberto," he finally said, "what you're describing is fraud. It's systematic, calculated fraud. The question is, how much evidence do you have?" "I have copies of everything," I said. "Every contract, every transfer, every payment." Good, Fernando said. "That's good. But here's the problem. You signed many of these documents. Your signature is on them. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, they're going to argue that you were a willing participant, that you understood what you were signing." My stomach sank. He was right. I had signed. I had been so desperate to be the good brother, the cooperative one, that I had essentially signed away my own future. "So what do I do?" I asked, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "We build a case," Fernando said. "We show a pattern of deception. We show that documents were altered, that you were misled about the nature of the agreements. We show that the loan itself was obtained under false pretenses. But Roberto, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be long, and it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be painful. Longer, more expensive, and more painful than losing everything," I asked. "Fair point," Fernando said. "Let me look at everything you have. Come by my office tomorrow." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, which might not be mine much longer, and I thought about my life. I thought about all the choices that had led me to this moment. I thought about the times I had ignored my gut instinct because I wanted to be kind. I thought about the times I had compromised myself to keep the peace. And I thought about something my father had said once, years ago, when I was young and still believed the world made sense. He had said, "Roberto, sometimes being a good man means being a hard man. Sometimes kindness means saying no." I had never been a hard man. I had never been good at saying no. But maybe it was time to learn. The next 3 months were a blur of meetings with Fernando, of gathering evidence, of trying to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. Fernando hired a forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia, who was absolutely ruthless in her attention to detail. She traced every penny, every transaction, every payment. She found discrepancies that even I hadn't noticed. She found payments to accounts that didn't officially exist. She found evidence of tax evasion, of money laundering, of a deliberate scheme to defraud not just me, but also the bank that had issued the loan. By the time Patricia was done with her analysis, she had a comprehensive report that was over 300 pages long, and it was devastating. "This is fraud," she told me, sitting across from me in Fernando's office, her expression grim. "This is systematic, calculated fraud. Your brother and your brother-in-law and your sister-in-law is complicit, by the way. They planned this, they executed it carefully, and they made mistakes. Criminals always do. "What do we do with this?" I asked. "We go to the authorities," Fernando said. "We file a complaint with the police, we prepare for litigation, and we do something else, something that might be more important." "What?" I asked. "We protect what's left," Fernando said. "We file an injunction to prevent any further transfers or sales of assets. We document everything. We make it impossible for them to move forward with whatever endgame they had planned." "And then?" I asked. "And then," Fernando said, leaning back in his chair, "we let them know that we know. We show them exactly what we have, exactly what we can prove, and we give them a choice." "What choice?" I asked, though I thought I already knew. "Confession and restitution or court," Fernando said simply. "Some people, when they realize they've been caught, they prefer to settle quietly. It's less public. It's less damaging to their reputations. But we have to be prepared for them to fight. Some people don't know when they're beaten." That afternoon, I went to the store. It was the first time I had been there since I had called in sick. Marcelo was in the front, helping a customer. When he saw me, his expression shifted. Just for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, fear. It was gone so fast I couldn't be sure. "Roberto," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You're back." "I need to talk to you," I said. "Both you and Carlos, tonight, at my apartment." "What's this about?" Marcelo asked, and now I could see the concern in his eyes. Good. He should be concerned. "Tonight," I repeated. 8 o'clock. Come alone. Well, you and Carlos. But don't bring Fernanda. This is between the three of us." I left before he could ask more questions. I went home and I waited. They arrived at 7:55. Marcelo was nervous. I could see it in the way he kept touching his collar, in the way his eyes kept darting around my apartment like he was looking for escape routes. Carlos was calm, too calm, with that confident smile still plastered on his face. He had no idea that I knew. He thought he was still in control. I had Fernando come as well. I wanted a witness. I wanted someone there to document what was said. I wanted everything clean, everything legal, everything unassailable. "Gentlemen," I said, once we were all seated in my living room, "I know what you've done. I have documentation of everything. I have a forensic accountant's report. I have evidence of fraud, of money laundering, of conspiracy. I have enough to put both of you in prison for several years." Marcelo's face went white. Carlos's smile faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure. "That's a serious accusation," Carlos said carefully. "I think you should consider your words very carefully, Roberto." "I have considered them," I said. "I have considered them very carefully, with my lawyer present and with all the evidence laid out in front of me. And I'm telling you this, I'm giving you a choice. You can settle this quietly. You can make restitution. You can transfer the business back to me, and you can pay back everything you've stolen, plus damages. Or you can go to court, and we'll let the judge decide. But understand this, if we go to court, I'm also going to the authorities. The police will be involved, the tax people will be involved, everything will come out." "You're bluffing," Carlos said, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was trying to figure out how much I actually knew, how much I could prove. "I'm not bluffing," I said calmly. "Fernando, show them the accountant's report." Fernando laid the thick folder on the coffee table between us. I watched as Marcelo and Carlos stared at it like it was a live snake. "You have 48 hours to contact my lawyer and agree to negotiate," I said. "After that, the police report goes in. The choice is yours." They left my apartment in silence. Marcelo wouldn't look at me. Carlos kept that calculated expression on his face, but I could see that the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. "That was good," Fernando said once they had gone. "You were calm, you were clear, and you didn't threaten anything you can't deliver. That's exactly how you handle this." "I feel sick," I admitted. "That's normal," Fernando said. You just confronted your brother with his own crimes. That's never going to feel good." True to form, Marcelo called the next afternoon. He sounded defeated, broken in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk," he said. I think we can work something out." The settlement took 6 months to finalize. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Carlos wanted to back out, when he thought he could fight this and win, but Fernando was relentless. Every time Carlos tried a different angle, Fernando countered it with evidence, with legal precedent, with the absolute certainty that any court in the country would rule in my favor. In the end, they paid. Not everything. The legal system doesn't work that cleanly, but enough. Enough to restore the business to me, enough to save the apartment, enough to rebuild what had been stolen. And Marcelo, my brother, sat across from me one last time in a mediation room, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Genuine remorse. Not the remorse of someone who was sorry he got caught, but the remorse of someone who had finally understood what he had done. Who had finally understood that he had destroyed the only family he had for money that he never even got to keep. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words sounded hollow, inadequate, insufficient. How could any words be sufficient for what he had done? "I know you are," I said, "but that doesn't change anything." That was the last time I saw my brother. He moved away, somewhere out of state, started over. I don't know if he found redemption or just a new place to hide. I don't know if he ever told anyone what he had done or if he carried it alone. But I knew something about myself. I knew that I was stronger than I had thought. I knew that sometimes being a good man meant being a hard man. I knew that my father would have been proud, not because I had won, but because I had finally stood up for myself. The hardware store still stands. I still run it, much more carefully now, much more aware of who I trust and why. And sometimes, late at night when the store is closed and I'm doing the books, I think about my brother, about Carlos, about all the ways that greed had consumed them. And I think about my father, about his words, about the importance of standing firm in who you are. I think about redemption and whether some people ever truly find it. But mostly, I think about the future, the one I almost lost and the one I fought to keep. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, I received an unexpected visitor at the hardware store. It was a woman I didn't recognize, professionally dressed, carrying a leather briefcase with the kind of exhausted expression that comes from carrying other people's burdens. "Roberto?" she asked, approaching the counter where I was organizing receipts. "Yes, that's me," I said, looking up. "Can I help you?" "My name is Juliana," she said. "I'm an investigator for the Federal Tax Authority. I'd like to talk to you about your brother's business practices, specifically about the loan that was obtained against your father's apartment." My stomach dropped. I thought everything was settled. I thought the worst was behind me. "Of course," I said, closing the ledger. "Let's talk in my office." What Juliana told me over the next hour was worse than anything I had imagined. The fraud wasn't just limited to the hardware store. Marcelo and Carlos had been running the same scheme with at least 3 other businesses. They had defrauded multiple families, stolen millions, and created a network of shell companies and fake partnerships that stretched across several states. "Your case was actually what opened the door for us," Juliana explained, spreading documents across my desk. "Your lawyer's documentation was so thorough, so meticulously organized, that it gave us the pattern we needed to investigate further. Without you coming forward, we might never have caught them." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we prosecute," Juliana said simply. "Full fraud charges, money laundering, tax evasion. If the evidence holds up, and frankly with what you've provided it should, they're looking at significant prison time." I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something else entirely. I felt the weight of knowing that my brother was going to spend years in prison. I felt the knowledge that I had set that in motion, even if it was the right thing to do. "How long?" I asked quietly. "If they're convicted on all counts, probably 15 to 20 years, Juliana said. "Maybe more, depending on how the judge rules." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around my apartment, around the neighborhood, thinking about my brother, thinking about the choices that had led him to this point, thinking about whether there was anything I could have done differently, said differently, been differently that might have prevented this entire catastrophe. My phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Marcelo. "How could you?" he screamed into the phone, his voice raw with rage and despair. "How could you do this to your own brother? To our family?" "I didn't do this to you, Marcelo," I said calmly, even though my hands were shaking. "You did this to yourself. I simply told the truth." "The truth?" He laughed bitterly. "The truth is that you couldn't let me have anything. You couldn't let me be successful. You had to destroy me. You stole from me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You lied to me. You conspired with Carlos to take everything I had. And when I found out and gave you a chance to make it right, you chose to fight instead. This isn't on me, Marcelo. This is on you. You were always the golden child," he continued, his voice breaking. "Dad always loved you more. Everything I ever did was never good enough. And now you've made sure the world knows it." "That's not fair," I said. "And you know it's not fair." "Fair?" He laughed again, that broken, desperate sound. "Fair is a luxury for people like you, Roberto. People with principles, people with integrity. I was just trying to survive, and you buried me for it." "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to steal and you got caught. There's a difference." He hung up after that. "The police called me the next day. They had traced the call, and they wanted to know if I wanted to file charges for the threatening nature of his language. I said no. I said he was just upset. I said I didn't want to press charges. But inside, I was furious. I was furious at him for what he had done. I was furious at myself for feeling guilty. I was furious at the entire situation, at the fact that trying to do the right thing had resulted in my own brother going to prison. The trial lasted 4 months. I had to testify. I had to sit in the witness stand and describe in graphic detail everything my brother had done to me. I had to watch him sit at the defense table, looking older than his years, looking broken. I had to see Fernanda in the gallery, her face hard and unforgiving. I had to see Carlos's expensive lawyer arguing every point, trying to create reasonable doubt, trying to shift the blame. In the end, it didn't matter. The evidence was too strong. The pattern was too clear. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Marcelo was sentenced to 18 years. Carlos got 16. Fernanda, because her involvement was less direct, was sentenced to 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2. I stood outside the courthouse after the sentencing, and a journalist approached me with a microphone and a camera crew. She wanted me to comment on the verdict, on the case, on the significance of what had just happened. "No comment," I said, turning away, but she followed me. "Mr. Roberto, don't you feel vindicated? Your brother committed fraud against you, and now he's going to prison. Isn't this justice?" I stopped walking. I turned to face her, and I saw in her eyes the same hunger for a story, for a dramatic moment that had consumed my brother and Carlos. The hunger for more, for vindication, for the satisfaction of seeing someone else fall. "Justice," I said slowly, "would be my brother never having done this in the first place. This isn't justice. This is consequences, and consequences are a poor substitute for the relationships we've lost along the way. 5 years passed. 5 years of rebuilding. 5 years of learning to live with the knowledge of what my brother had done and what I had had to do in response. The hardware store thrived under my management. I modernized it carefully, thoughtfully, without the reckless expansion that Marcelo had tried to implement. I paid back the fraudulent loan. I restored the business to profitability. I made it sustainable for the long term. The apartment remained in my name, safe, secure, a reminder of my father's legacy and of the importance of protecting what you love. I built a new life. I wasn't happy, not exactly, but I was whole. I was myself again, and there was something valuable in that, even if it had cost me everything to get there. Then one day, I received a letter. It had a prison return address. My heart sank when I saw it, but I opened it anyway. The letter was from Marcelo. His handwriting was different than I remembered, smaller, less confident, as if 5 years in prison had diminished not just his freedom, but his sense of self. "Roberto," it began, "I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll even want to hear from me, but I need to try. I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago. I was wrong. Not just about the business, not just about the scheme with Carlos, but about everything. I was wrong about who I was, about what I wanted, about what I was willing to do to get it. When I was in here, I had a lot of time to think, too much time, and I realized that I never thanked you. I never told you that you were right. I never acknowledged that you tried to be a good brother, even when I was being a terrible one. The worst part is that I know an apology isn't enough. I know that words, even sincere words, can't fix what I broke. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach us. I understand that character matters more than success, that integrity matters more than money, that family matters more than anything. I'm going to die in here, Roberto. Not literally, maybe, but the person I was is already dead, and maybe that's what I needed. Maybe that's what had to happen for me to finally become someone worth saving. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to visit. I don't even expect you to write back. But I needed you to know that you were the good brother. You always were. And I was too blind and too angry to see it. Your brother, Marcelo. I sat with that letter for a long time. I read it multiple times, looking for signs of manipulation, looking for some evidence that this was just another con, another way of trying to get something from me. But I couldn't find it. What I found instead was genuine remorse, the kind that comes from truly understanding what you've lost. I didn't write back, not immediately. I needed time to process, to decide whether forgiveness was something I could offer, or whether I needed to protect myself by maintaining the distance that had been created. A month later, I went to visit him. I didn't plan it. I just found myself driving to the prison one Saturday afternoon, going through the security procedures, walking into the visitation room. Marcelo looked shocked to see me. He looked older, worn down by the weight of his own regret and the prison system's indifference. He stood when I approached, uncertain whether I wanted to sit with him or just deliver some final condemnation. "Hello, Marcelo," I said, sitting down across from him. "Roberto," he said, his voice filled with emotion. I didn't know if you would come." "I didn't know either," I admitted. "I'm still not sure why I did." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years and a lifetime of complicated history between us. "I forgive you," I said finally. "Not because what you did was forgivable, not because I've forgotten or because the pain has gone away, but because I'm tired of carrying the anger. It's too heavy and it's making me bitter. So I'm putting it down. I'm forgiving you so that I can move forward." Marcelo's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve—" "You don't," I interrupted gently, "but that's not what forgiveness is about. Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to let go of the poison that's been in your body for so long that you've forgotten what it felt like to be clean." We talked for the next 2 hours. We talked about our father, about our childhood, about the moments that had shaped us and broken us. We talked about the choices we had made and the consequences we were living with. And slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something that resembled a relationship. Not the relationship we had before, because that was built on delusion and false trust. But something new, something authentic, something real. When I left the prison that day, I felt lighter than I had in 5 years. Not happy, the situation was still tragic, still devastating in its own way. But lighter, as if I had been carrying a weight that I no longer needed to carry. I never became close with Marcelo again. We corresponded occasionally, brief letters about life, about the store, about the neighborhood. He was released after serving 15 years. Good behavior, parole board approval, the machinery of the system moving at its own pace. When he got out, we had coffee once. He was a different person, quieter, more reflective, genuinely changed. He moved to a different city, found work as a bookkeeper for a small firm. He built a modest, honest life. And I respected him for that, even though I couldn't quite say we were brothers again. Maybe we never would be. Maybe what we had been before had been too corrupted, too damaged by what had happened. But I made peace with that. I made peace with the knowledge that some relationships can't be repaired, only accepted for what they were and what they've become. Years later, when I was older myself, reflecting on my life, I realized that the greatest gift my brother had given me, inadvertently, painfully, was the knowledge that I was stronger than I thought, that I could stand up for myself, that I could face injustice and respond with clarity and courage instead of just accepting it passively. My father had tried to teach me that, but sometimes I think we have to learn our hardest lessons from the people who hurt us the most. The hardware store is still there. I'm thinking about retiring soon, passing it on to someone I trust, someone who understands what it means to carry a legacy and protect it. The apartment is still mine, and I've thought many times about what to do with it, whether to keep it, whether to sell it, whether to give it to someone who needs it more than I do. But for now, I'm just living. I'm just existing in the present, grateful for the lessons the past has taught me, cautious about the future, and finally at peace with who I am and what I've done. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do, our best, with the knowledge we have and the hope that it's enough.